Welcome to the Veganic Living Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Smith. Today my guest is Dr. Will Tuttle. Dr. Will Tuttle is a visionary author of the acclaimed bestseller, The World Peace Diet. Published in 16 languages, he is a recipient of the Courage of Conscience Award and the Empty Cages Prize. He is also the author of Your Inner Islands on Developing Intuition and is the editor of Circles of Compassion on the interconnection of social justice issues. A vegan since 1980, he's a frequent radio, television, and online presenter and has created several wellness and advocacy training programs. Featured in Cowspiracy and other documentary films, he is the co-founder of the worldwide Prayer Circle for Animals. A former Zen monk with a PhD from UC Berkeley, Dr. Tuttle is also a noted composer and pianist, and lectures and does concerts extensively throughout the world promoting peace and cultural healing. I'd like to apologize for any background noise while creating this episode. We were located in the only space we could find at this venue, which was located near the kitchen. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Will, so much for being here.
Thank you,
I
Kim.
really appreciate it.
It's great to be able to share these ideas with you.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you as my first guest.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah, it's great.
And I have read the book, The World Peace Diet, and I love the connections you make in the book. And I want to start out with a little bit of background about you. How did you come about doing the plant-based diet or vegan diet?
Right. Okay, so just very briefly, I was born and raised in a typical family in terms of food. We ate the usual meals. This was back in New England in the 1950s, lots of meat, dairy products, and eggs. And I never questioned eating those foods because I had no way that I could have even conceived that there was any other way to eat. You know, we needed to eat meat and dairy products and eggs to get enough protein and calcium, and animals were put here on this earth for us to eat, and that especially cows and pigs and chickens and these animals. So I went away to college and I started to learn more about vegetarianism. I started to meet a few people that were part of the anti-war movement, which I thought was a good idea. And but I still was eating meat. And then I left home with my brother right after college in 1975, and we thought we would try to walk all the way to California on kind of a spiritual pilgrimage. And we ended up basically walking to Buffalo. After a few months, we walked south all the way to Alabama.
Wow.
And on the way, we stopped for a while in Tennessee at a community. It was the largest hippie commune in the world at that time, 1975,
Wow.
called The Farm. And they were mostly people from California. And they were all vegetarians. 900 people. They were eating what we would call today a vegan diet. There was no meat, dairy products, or eggs. They called it vegetarian because no one heard of the word vegan in 1975. But we, myself especially, I really resonated with what they were doing because they told me that the reason that people are hungry and starving is because we feed most of the food that we're growing to animals, and that causes food shortages, and food shortages are the main driving force behind war and conflict. And I was always into the peace movement, so to me it seemed like if we wanted to have peace, we would want to have justice, and we want to have everybody getting enough to eat. And I could see clearly that eating meat and dairy products and eggs was diverting enormous amounts of grain to animals while people are going hungry. And I could also see very clearly, because every day I was eating with these people, that you could thrive on a plant-based diet. You know, they had about 900 people total. 200 of them were were children, and they were thriving on a totally vegan diet.
You mean they weren't dying from lack of protein?
They were not dragging themselves along in the dirt, saying, "Help! I need some protein." They were really doing great. They were creative, they were energetic, they were inspired and inspiring. So that was it. From that day, I talked to this guy about why they were vegetarians, and he told me about the food shortages, and he told me also a little bit about the routine abuse of animals for food. And I just suddenly thought, gosh, that's so terrible to be doing this. And I was doing a lot of meditating. I was trying to question really more deeply my life and what I was going to do with the rest of my life. I was only 20, in my early 20s. I think I just turned 22. So that was it. I became a vegetarian at that point, and then 5 years later, fast forward 5 years, I was in San Francisco at that point, and I was living in Buddhist meditation centers quite a bit and other places like that, and I just did more research on dairy products and eggs, and so I became a vegan in 1980, and that was 38 years ago now. And I have to say that I always say, it was a great decision going vegan. I'm so glad I did it. When we've traveled and we've talked to people who went vegan, we've asked them if they have any regrets about going vegan, and they always say, yes, I have one regret, and that was I didn't do it sooner. And that was really, I think for me, I'm glad I did do it when I was still pretty young. But it's been a wonderful opportunity for me because I was pretty much a vegan advocate from the very, very beginning. I was talking about how to everyone, it's better for world hunger and your health and for the poor animals. And it's just so great to see all these vegan products nowadays in restaurants and health food stores that have a whole vegan section, and the vegan meetup groups. And we travel. My wife is also a longtime vegan, Madeline, and we travel worldwide, all over the world. I mean, Asia and Africa and Europe, and discussing and promoting really plant-based eating and vegan eating. And it's great to see it's a worldwide movement now, with lots and lots of progress being made in awareness, really. And so I think there's nothing, for me, there's no greater benefit to be part of something for a human lifetime than to be part of this movement. I think if we come to the earth and we want to do something to contribute to making a better world and live a life of meaning and purpose, to me there's no better way to do that than to just find a way to contribute creatively to helping there be enough food for everyone, and animals not to be abused, and for people to be healthier, and ecosystems to not be destroyed.
Right. Our resources are running out.
Resources are really being depleted by animal agriculture. That's one of the things that I've done a lot of research on, and it's shocking. There's two things that are shocking. One is it's shocking how much more resource intensive it is to eat meat and dairy products. It takes, for example, according to the National Academy of Sciences, and they're a pretty conservative organization, they're saying it's about 15 times as much land and water and pollution, petroleum, to feed someone eating a standard Western diet as someone eating an organic plant-based diet. 15 times as much. This is huge, and it's on one level it's terrible. You think, gosh, what an enormous waste, but it's also really good news. I mean, the good news is that as we wake up and move to a plant-based diet and way of eating and living, we will really drastically reduce the amount of land that we're cutting down forests to grow grain, the amount of water that we're spraying. The aquifers are being depleted, global climate is being destabilized, rainforests are being cut down, oceans are being completely strip-mined of fish, to feed not just us humans, but to feed animals. That's one of the big things people don't realize. So the amount of depletion and environmental destruction caused by animal agriculture is greater than anything else we're doing. That's shocking. The other thing that's shocking is how no one's talking about this, really. I mean, why are we not talking about this? And I think that's why it's so great to have a podcast, because this is alternative media. And I understand this very clearly because I was raised in the media. My father owned a whole chain of newspapers in Boston, weekly newspapers, the local newspapers, and I learned early on that you do not run news articles that will upset your advertisers. You don't want to upset the advertisers. You write some article that makes their industry or their practice not look good, they'll stop advertising, and they'll advertise with somebody else who doesn't do that. So I understand very clearly that the basic media, the mainstream media, the radio, television, newspapers, that is a completely propaganda for the large corporate and financial institutions that want us to look at the world in a certain way.
Right.
They want us to not question the official stories of what we're eating, the whole medical and financial establishment and the wars and everything else. So that's why what you're doing, I think, by having a podcast, it's democratizing our education and our information and our communities, so that we can share information together and free ourselves from the exploitation and domination by just a tiny elite.
Right.
And that's what animal agriculture is. It's the domination of animals by an elite species. But what I've realized, and I wrote the World Peace Diet, is to show that if we participate in that ourselves as humans, we end up getting dominated also. Anyone who's eating animal foods is actually, I think, being exploited, because the amount of disease and the amount of suffering from animal-based foods is devastating to families.
And what it's doing to the sick care system also for
Right.
humans. It all is reflective back in our health, what we're doing to the animals.
Exactly. Yeah, I know. It's so ironic. Like, we were just in India, where for thousands of years India was kind of ahead of the world, and as a vegetarian culture, and people were inspired by India to stop eating meat, and now India has been unfortunately sort of somehow manipulated into becoming the largest dairy consuming country in the world, and they now have the highest rates of diabetes in the world.
Wow.
They're eating huge amounts of dairy, and diabetes is going through the roof. So we have to realize that eating animal foods is destroying not just the earth, but also our health, like you say. Yeah.
I have to say, one thing that I love about your book is how you took the time and realized and connected everything together, because I truly believe that what we do does reflect back and come back on us. And I would like you to talk a little bit about your book and about that
Right.
whole idea, especially with what we're seeing in the media and even on social networking.
Right.
If somebody is on a social network and they want to say something negative to somebody, they're not having to be face to face, so you see a lot more negative.
Right.
Well, with our food, they're paying somebody else to do
Right.
harmful things to these animals
Right.
and kill them, and they're disconnecting. There's so much disconnection.
Right.
And please.
Yeah, that's the
elaborate.
thing. Yeah, the in the World Peace Diet, there's a number of chapters that go into the consequences of animal agriculture on different levels, like you're saying, to our physical health, to our psychological health, to our spiritual health, to our cultural health, and to our environmental health. And the underlying principle is that whatever we sow, we will reap. If we sow seeds to grow carrots, we are not going to get broccoli, we're going to get carrots. So if we're sowing seeds of violence and abuse towards animals and disease toward animals, we're forcing these animals by the millions to live in extremely toxic environments, where they're unfortunately driven into insanity by being overcrowded and hyper-confined, where their babies are stolen from them, they're raped, they're impregnated without their permission. That's what we call rape, on what the industry calls rape racks. And their babies are stolen, and then their own lives are stolen from them, their purposes are stolen from them. So how can we think that our actions don't have any consequence, that we can just blithely go along and continue to sow seeds of terror and fear and pain and suffering and abuse and misery and violence to literally millions of beings whose interests are to them as important to them as my interests are to me? They are equal to us in their capacity to suffer. They may be even superior to us, in the sense that we, if we're forced into a difficult situation, we can somehow perhaps use our mind and rationalize to make sense out of it. But these animals just suffer, and there's no question. Anyone who has a companion animal or dog or cat understands that there's someone in there, there's someone behind those eyes who's a being who has her own unique personality and interests. And so cows and pigs and chickens and these other animals, fishes, also, it's well understood now by science that all of these animals are endowed with these capacities, And so when we just go against our natural intelligence and our natural empathy and our natural sensitivity and numb ourselves and desensitize ourselves and pretend that what we do doesn't matter, it's very similar to what you're saying about social media. We just disconnect from the being, and we just then we can abuse them, right? When we make the disconnection. And so when we go to the store or the restaurant and we order a prime rib or a cheeseburger or fish sticks or any of these foods, that we've reduced the being to a commodity, to just a thing. And we have to realize that when we do that to others, we're sowing the seeds for the same thing to happen to us. And now I think we can see very clearly we live in a society where the diseases that we force these animals to endure, like osteoporosis and obesity and cancer, we inflict these diseases on millions of animals that we use for food, and what do? We get whole epidemics of osteoporosis and diabetes and obesity and cancer and so forth. And we force these animals also into very difficult social situations. We break apart their families, and we find that sociologists are saying that the worst problems that we have as human beings is that our families structures are breaking down. We force them into psychological depression, insomnia, and so forth. And we find that in our human world, the pharmaceutical industries are making huge profits selling pharmaceutical drugs to people who have depression and insomnia, and the same things we inflict on animals. And so to understand that as we enslave animals, we end up creating an economic system and political system that actually takes away our freedom and turns all of us into, in many ways, heartlessly treated commodities in an economic system that is really difficult for many people. And people suffer injustice and inequality because we're living in a society based on animal agriculture where we're sowing those seeds all the time. So the basic idea is this: if we would like to liberate ourselves and live in a world with equality between human beings and justice and respect, we can do that. There's nothing stopping us. We live on a beautiful and abundant planet. The one thing we cannot do is inflict that on animals and expect that we'll be free of it ourselves. Whatever we do to animals, we're going to end up doing to ourselves. And so the price we pay for a hamburger or fish sticks or cheese and so forth really is a huge price. We pay not only the price of our physical diseases that are rampant in our society and the environmental devastation, but the social injustice, the inequality, the mental and spiritual disconnectedness that you mentioned are part of that, and the conflict and the war that we experience. And we have to understand that all of these things do make large profits for a tiny elite. I mean, the war is very profitable. Disease is very profitable. But do we want to use our own money and energy to support profits of disease and environmental devastation and war for just a tiny elite? Or would we rather create communities of kindness and caring and health and sustainability where our children can experience radiant health, where we can experience a sense of respect for ourselves and for our earth, where we can create communities? And I think that's really the challenge for us today, is to question eating animal foods and to realize the wonderful good news, which is that all of us can thrive on this beautiful and abundant planet if we eat the way we're told, the way we know we should be eating, which is a plant-based diet. That if we're eating animal foods, we're only following orders that were injected into us without our permission by a society that does not have our interests at its core. And it's time for us, I think, to do what you're doing with this podcast, which is to have a conversation about a healthy community and how that would look, and the wonderful foods that we can create that we see in vegan restaurants and health food stores now that are plant-based, and they're so delicious and so much healthier, and it's just a fantastic change that we can all make and then help other people make as well.
Oh, definitely. One of the things that while you were talking dawned on me that all of these animals that are suffering from the diseases that you see the people are, that would never happen in the wild.
No.
It's from the way they're being brought up.
Exactly.
And that with the factory farming, the way it's grown, and animals never seeing the light of day until they're being trucked off to the slaughterhouse. Look at us now. They've scared us to being indoors all the time. The whole thing is just absurd. It's just craziness.
Yeah, I know, it's true. And that's one of the things I realized actually in the research that I did for the World Peace Diet. I did about 20 years of research before I wrote the World Peace Diet. And I realized actually in the research that everything that we now do or ever have done to animals, sooner or later we have done to each other. What, the we never had human slavery until we had animal slavery. We never had human war. There was no war until we started this war against animals. And so we started owning them as property and using them and abusing them. That led directly to the ancient Sanskrit word gavya. It means the desire for more cows. That's the very first word on this planet that means war. It was the desire for more cows. It was the whole idea was you had these large conflicts to get more wealth. Animals originally were wealth. The more capita means head. The more head of sheep and goats and cows you owned, the wealthier you would be, and you could double your money by just stealing someone else's cows, but people wouldn't give up without a fight, so you had these large-scale conflicts over animals and ownership of animals, and then land for those animals, and water for those animals. And so all these fights over land and property, which still continue to this day, because we're eating animal foods. I used to teach Plato's Republic I taught college philosophy courses, and it's very clear. Socrates says, and if we want to eat meat, then we'll need to go to war, will we not? And everyone says, yes, absolutely. This was well understood 2,000 years ago. And it seems like we have not learned the lesson that our war against animals, forcing them into disease, we create the same kind of conflicts, even worse, among ourselves, the diseases that we have, the physical and psychological diseases. But again, I want to emphasize the good news, which is that there is an awakening happening. More and more people are realizing that eating animal foods is not in our best interest. It's counterproductive on every level. It's unnecessary. And the irony is there's no scientific research to back it up. There's literally hundreds of studies that show that the societies that eat the least amount of dairy products have the strongest bones, that the societies who eat the most dairy products have the highest rates of hip fractures and osteoporosis. And the same thing with the other diseases. The more animal foods we're eating, the sicker we are, the higher the rates of cancer, the higher the rates of obesity, diabetes, and autoimmune diseases, and dementia, and heart disease, and strokes. So moving to an organic and plant-based whole foods diet not only gives us the food that we can thrive on ourselves, but we can do it on a fraction of the resources as well.
I like that you also put organic in there.
Yes.
I went vegan in 91 and all organic in 96.
Great.
Kind of way before it was popular.
Right.
And seeing the growth of everything out there happening, like you said, it's amazing to me. The dairy industry is actually fearing that all these plant-based milks are taking over and wanting to fight for the right of the word milk.
Right.
So we are making progress, and it's getting out there, and there's some wonderful documentaries out there now, and I'm hoping our listeners have seen most of them.
Right. Yeah, the documentaries are fantastic. There's last weekend I was at the What the Health Cowspiracy conference in San Francisco, which was basically put on by Kip Anderson, who created this great film Cowspiracy, which talks about the environmental impact of animal agriculture, and also What the Health, which talks about the health impact of animal agriculture and how eating a plant-based diet is the best thing that we can do for our environment and for our physical health. And Kip went through actually the World Peace Diet training in Cincinnati years ago, back in 2011, and told me he wanted to make some films about the World Peace Diet, and went on to make these two films, and there's going to be more films coming. And we saw also the trailer for a new film called Cowspiracy, which is about the impact of fishing, the fishing industry, the devastating impact of the fishing industry on fishes and marine ecosystems. And so I think documentaries are so helpful, because when we can really understand at a deep level the interconnections of the violence towards ecosystems and toward our own health and towards each other, then we can actually get up out of our chairs and say, okay, I'm going to go to the refrigerator right now and I'm going to throw away or give away these products of violence and misery and toxicity. Animal foods concentrate so much toxicity, and I'm going to replace them with organically grown vegetables and fruits and grains and nuts and beans and seeds that use a fraction of the water and the land, and actually build the cells in my body with health and joy and abundance. And not only do that, I'm going to tell my friends. I'm going to share these ideas with other people, because I think when we do that, we begin to be part of the solution rather than just being part of the problem.
I'm glad to hear that he's coming out with Seaspiracy.
Yeah.
I took T. Colin Campbell's course and was shocked when I learned how devastating what they're doing to the oceans and creating dead zones. And I think sharks haven't, even since you went in 1975 to learn about veganism, that they've killed 90% of the sharks off just since then. That's crazy and very sad. And I think of how many children and grandchildren that our listeners have that won't know the animals that were around when we were young.
Oh. Well, yeah, I'll just say a few words. I remember 2 years ago we went to Africa, and I gave lectures promoting veganism in Africa. And it really is heartbreaking to see that the massive populations of elephants, zebras, giraffes, lions, hippopotamus, rhinoceros, all these animals, these beautiful animals, they're now being pushed into oblivion, into extinction. And there's one reason. It's because people take out their wallet and pay for meat, dairy products, and eggs. And we're introducing the same model in Africa as we introduced here in North America, in Europe, in Asia, of cutting down forests and growing grains, corn primarily and soy, genetically engineered to feed to pigs and cows and chickens that are stuck in factory farms. And so wild animals are being wiped out. And I think we have to realize that if we're eating fish, the primary source of oxygen in the world is plankton and the whole marine ecosystems. And animal agriculture is attacking these ecosystems in two ways. One is by overfishing. The other is by the massive dead zones that come from the runoff from the monocropping on the land. So if we're eating chicken and beef and pork, we're causing huge runoff, toxic runoff into the oceans, which are causing dead zones and pollution, plus the global climate destabilization, causing the bleaching and destruction of coral reefs, which is causing the loss of habitat for fishes and other the marine animals. And then the other thing is that there are these gigantic nets that pull up massive quantities of animals. It's like strip mining the oceans, where you have huge bottom trawlers, mid-range trawlers, and surface trawlers that bring up everything in their path. And literally approximately 50% of everything that's brought up is not sellable. It's called bycatch. So very often they just use it. They throw it away, or they just use it. Like, people don't realize, like if I'm eating some kind of wild-caught fish like tuna perhaps, or salmon, that there's bycatch, and the bycatch very often is dolphins and whales. And now, I just was reading today, these dolphins and whales very often they dump them out on the deck, then they cut them up and use them for bait for longline operations. So if I'm eating fish, there's just massive violence towards seabirds that are caught in these nets, turtles, whales, dolphins, all the animals, sharks, of course, because of shark finning. This devastation of ecosystems is completely unnecessary. And so instead of trying to find fish that are sustainable, we should be just going vegan. Move to a plant-based way of eating. That has the greatest impact to be of benefit to animals and to have a world for our children this beautiful earth is under a severe attack right now by human activity, and the primary activity is animal agriculture.
Also, the to steer away from eating fish or anything from the ocean, any seafood at all, there's so many pesticides and mercury and other heavy metals, and it's not a health food at all. It's
Well,
sold to us as a health
yeah.
food, but it's not a health food.
Right. Yeah, fish concentrate toxins in their flesh thousands of times, very often hundreds of thousands or even millions of times more in their flesh than is in the water. And everything ends up in the water because fish don't only swim in the water, they're breathing the water and they're eating other fish, and there's very long chains of so toxins like heavy metals, PCBs, dioxin, nuclear radiation, all of that concentrates in fish. And then fish are also caught and fed to cows and pigs and chickens. So if I'm eating cheese, I'm actually eating fish, because scientists discovered that if we enrich the feed of these dairy cows with fish meal, then they give more milk. So I'm not just eating the pesticides in the grains that the cows are eating, plus all the naturally occurring toxins in the milk, like IGF-1 growth hormone and casein, which we don't have renin to break down like little calves have, so it's a potent carcinogen that's naturally occurring, as well as the estrogen. There's all these other toxins from the feed they're eating, plus the toxins from the fish that they're eating, and all of that concentrates primarily in the fatty tissues, which ends up in the cheese especially. It takes about 15 pounds of milk to make 1 pound of cheese, right? So if we're eating cheese, we're eating just enormous quantities of toxins that are carcinogenic and cause many different types of diseases that people are experiencing. So it's the same thing we've been saying. Violence towards others hurts us as much and even more than it hurts them.
And I find it funny that people will always ask where do you get your protein? And the question of, well, should I eat soy products because of the estrogens? And there are phytoestrogens that actually help, whereas, like you just said, the concentrated estrogens in cheese, nobody questions eating cheese.
Yeah, that's really bizarre because the actual estrogen that is in the body of a dairy cow is molecularly identical to the estrogen in human bodies. Both men and women have estrogen. And if we're taking in estrogen from a cow in dairy products, we're taking in a hormone that we shouldn't be taking in. We shouldn't be bringing in more estrogen. Our bodies make the right amount. So it's well understood now uh, that dairy products are one of the driving forces behind uterine cancer and breast cancer and prostate cancer, all of it connected to estrogen levels that are screwed up. And soy is a phytoestrogen. It's not the same thing. It's like we're not worried about getting Dutch elm disease, right? We're not worried about catching diseases from trees. This is a phytoestrogen. And if anything, it actually it protects us against cancer because the phytoestrogens take up the sites that could go to these other estrogen molecules and actually protect us from disease. So again, we've been told things that are not true by various organizations like the Weston A. Price Foundation, for example, which tells us that soy is dangerous. Soy is a bean like any other bean. It's very rich. It's high in protein. It's high in fat, but I would say it's not something we should eat enormous quantities of, but it's certainly basically a healthy food, and a good way to get nutrients. But we don't have to eat soy. We can eat other things instead. We can eat lentils, and we can eat rice, and we can eat vegetables and grains and many other things. The great good news is that there's literally thousands of delicious, colorful, plant-based foods that are loaded with nutrients, and they're available and we can grow them ourselves. We lived for 17 years in an RV, and I couldn't grow. We didn't have a garden because we were living on the roads, but I grew sprouts. And we ate our own sprouts, and now we have a little house. We have some land, and we have a food forest that we've planted about 40 fruit and nut trees and lots of herbs and berries and vegetables, and we get a lot of the food from our land. And I think that's something all of us can do something to perhaps grow a little bit of food or at least support people who have community gardens or farmers markets who are growing organically and create a foundation for a healthy future.
Which is wonderful. And now, even if you don't have a lot of room, you can do it hydroponically in
food towers.
Exactly, in a food tower.
Right.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's since we chose to go vegan, the world it's opened up to veganism so much, so rapidly, just in the past 5 years. I'm amazed and pleased. Sometimes you kind of felt like you were the only one on the planet there for a while. And now, and people, when years ago, like you said, everyone called themselves a vegetarian, even if they were practicing veganism, because the word wasn't known. And now people, at least when you say, "Oh, I'm vegan," they know what that means.
Absolutely.
And it's growing by leaps and bounds. I think we've hit our tipping point. I think we're going to see a lot more.
Do you? Yeah.
I really do.
I think,
and now that there's a lot more transitional foods too. They're not the healthiest. They're not always organic. But at least it gives someone they can wean themselves off.
No, I think you're absolutely right. The transitional foods, it's better if we can get them organically, I would say. There are some that are organic, but the fantastic thing, though, is that, like you're saying, when we travel around the United States and also worldwide, we see vegan restaurants, vegan stores, vegan meetup groups, vegan sanctuaries, vegan online groups, vegan communities springing up everywhere, and people are realizing that when we victimize animals, we're the victims. We're actually destroying our own possibilities, and not just us, for our children too. But we will not have a world for our children if we continue to eat animal foods, because it's a direct attack, a direct assault on the life support systems of our planet. The oceans, the rivers, the climate, the rainforests are being completely devastated by animal agriculture. We see this when we travel. So it's really critical, it's imperative that we take this seriously and understand that we live in a very important time now on planet Earth, that all of us do what we can to not only go vegan ourselves, but to encourage other people to do this as well in a loving and respectful way.
Yes, definitely a loving and respectful way. That was another thing I was going to bring up. You see a lot in the news and also on social media that there's marches going on for women power and for against how women are being treated. And I see women out there with signs, but I want to go out and say, do you support the industries that treat other females the way you don't want to be treated? That's a huge connection I think people need to make. That and the accusation of racism. There's speciesism. If we don't start seeing every living being as equal, nobody will consider us as equal.
Yeah, that's a huge, thank you for bringing that up. And I just think it's something that we can all just do the best we can to try to understand that animals unfortunately bear the full fury of our unwillingness to see them as beings. And by what I point out in the World Peace Diet and another book I wrote after that, I'm the editor of, called Circles of Compassion, Essays Connecting Issues of Justice, that racism, sexism, heterosexism, ableism, classism, all these ways that we human beings dominate and exploit each other have their roots in animal agriculture. They have their actual roots in speciesism, like you say, that all of us really, I think, to understand this properly, to just understand we've all been wounded by being raised in a society where from the time we're little infants, we've had to participate in these mealtime rituals where we learn at a very deep level that certain beings are not beings, they're just objects, and we're superior and they're inferior. We're going to dominate them and we're going to exploit them. And when we do that, we create a whole mentality of domination and exploitation, which we then use to create racism and sexism. Animal agriculture is the domination of animals, but it's especially the domination of female animals. I mean, that's the core of animal agriculture, is stealing the babies from the mothers. And so it's based on seeing females as mere breeders, not respecting them as beings, seeing them as things. So it's important for us to realize that to heal the woundedness in ourselves, we can never have true liberation for women if we're eating animal foods, because that is the exact same domination and exploitation we're doing to these other females, these other mothers. How can we liberate our own feminine side if we're dominating these other female animals? So I think, again, it comes back to opening our hearts and minds to the natural wisdom that is present, and then making the behavior change in our own life to actually walk our talk and say, okay, I'm in favor of liberation for people of color and for people of different preferences and so forth and different genders. And so I am eating a whole foods plant-based diet, so that my life, I'm not voting for with my wallets, I'm not voting for domination and exploitation of other beings.
And really good point there, voting with your dollars, supporting what your beliefs are. I don't think people realize what a hamburger would actually cost if it was its true price. It's getting subsidized ridiculous amounts of money. Yes. When you think of your puppy or your kitten or something like your furry family member and how much it actually costs just to raise them, can you imagine how much it actually costs, the actual cost of raising all of these factory farmed animals? We don't pay that price in the supermarket at all. And another
Exactly.
go ahead.
No, well, just say that our whole culture was basically organized by the ranchers. Who came over here from Europe and bought up the land? What did they do with it? They put cows on the land. They put, they still run the government essentially. So there's massive subsidies, water. I mean, gosh, just seeing all the irrigation systems that are built and paid for by the government to make animal agriculture possible, and the massive grazing programs and all of the tax write-offs and the direct subsidies and the indirect subsidies. It would cost, and plus all the health care costs. We can't imagine the stuff. So the whole idea is to realize that our economy would be so much healthier if we would move to a plant-based diet as well.
And it's kind of funny when they tell us to take less showers and turn off the water when you're brushing your teeth, when it's literally a drop in the bucket compared to what they use to raise animals for food. That's where our big cost is, and why we're seeing droughts and having issues. The state of California should be telling people, eat that veggie burger, not the hamburger, instead of worrying about how long they take a shower.
I know. It's 5,000. This is a conservative estimate. 5,000 gallons of water to make 1 pound of beef, 1,000 gallons of water to make 1 gallon of milk. I mean, 1,000 to 1. People say that couldn't be possible. It's no way it could take 1,000 gallons of water to make 1 gallon of milk. That does take that much, because these cows, not only do they drink a lot, they eat a lot. And the food that they eat, alfalfa primarily, it has to be irrigated. And so you're talking about massive quantities of water to create these animal-based foods. And we live in an area of Northern California where we've had fires around Santa Rosa, where people have lost their homes, and where we're having droughts, where they're telling us we can't even water our vegetable gardens, or we have to take shorter showers, and yet no one says that we shouldn't be eating animal foods. And why is that? That's why it's good to see the movie Cowspiracy, because we understand the politics behind this is based on the idea that agriculture can use as much water as they want, because we don't question meat, dairy products, and eggs in our society. As I discussed in the World Peace Diet, we live in a herding culture that's organized at its core around herding animals.
And the scary thing is people will think, I want to get an electric car. the oil companies, they run the world. I actually think it's the food corporations and industries that actually run it, because they're kind of today's mafia. You're going to advertise what we want you to and don't say anything bad about it. And people that expose it, luckily it's been able to get out there quite a bit more with the internet, what's really going on, and the documentaries, because the poor people, they actually put their lives on the line to expose what's going on.
Right. Yeah, no, that's true. It's we're living in a time where information is the most important thing that we can share, and more than the information, I think it's the narrative. It's the actual story. I think what we understand is whoever controls the narrative controls the whole society. So the narrative in place that we need to eat meat, dairy products, and eggs to be healthy, that narrative is sort of injected into us without our permission from the time we're little infants.
In our
And
school systems.
in our school systems, in going to the doctor's office, it's on television. Our parents teach us that. It's everywhere. And now what we're seeing is, like with this podcast and the efforts that are being made, is a new narrative that for health, because this old narrative isn't really a narrative of death and destruction, and we have no future with that narrative. It's a narrative that exploits animals and exploits people and ecosystems. And the new narrative is based on non-exploitation. It's based on kindness and respect for all living beings, on health, on interconnectedness, on awareness, on joy and creativity. And it is the narrative of the future. It's a narrative that leads to a doorway that is open, that we can all take, a doorway to a positive future for us and for our children. And each one of us can help pave the way for reaching this doorway by understanding the devastating effect of the old narrative and understanding the incredibly healing effect of this new narrative, which is really actually an ancient narrative. I understood this in my research, that and going to China recently and seeing how, for hundreds and really thousands of years, people have understood that to have a society based on kindness and compassion means to eat plant-based foods. And this wisdom has been repressed, but now this wisdom is coming back. I call it the resurrection of Sophia. Sophia is the sacred feminine dimension of wisdom that's within women and men, especially in women, I think, who are reconnecting with their inner wisdom of compassion and kindness and creating a way of eating and a way of living based on sustainability. And I think the more we can contribute to that, the more meaningful and happy our lives will be.
I have to say also, one thing that I find funny, especially with the paleo and the ketogenic diets that are so large, you're bringing up the feminine and the men that want to do paleo because eating meat makes them manly. And does it exactly make them manly?
Well, the restriction of blood flow works everywhere, including not only the brain but also the penis. And I think to understand that it's real in the heart, and when we restrict blood flow by saturated fat and cholesterol and so forth, it hurts us on every level. And so it's much more manly, I think, actually, to be kind and caring and loving of others and protect life. That's really the new form of manliness. The macho male mentality of the hard, tough, disconnected, ranching type man, that's a recipe for utter destruction of everything. And it's time for us to mature beyond that and to heal really that archetype and to heal that wound. And Sophia, the sacred feminine dimension within men and women, is rising in us to do that. And it's a beautiful future that is available to us when we wake up and encourage each other to learn more about this subject.
One last thing I wanted to mention. I see and talk to a lot of people about going vegan. My husband and I own our health food store, and we've helped a lot of people on that road. And one thing I notice is there's such an emotional connection to food. It connects people to their mom making something special for them, and that motherly love connection. The thing is we're seeing that we're taking away that motherly love from these animals, And I see moms that are afraid to not give their children dairy because they think they're not going to grow up strong. And how do we get that message that it's actually more loving, that the mom is giving them a plant-based milk or plant-based ice cream or made from frozen bananas or something wonderful? You can make that connection with plant foods.
Right. Well, it's basically the brainwashing in our society is so thick. Uh, I was raised where everyone thought you had to give cow's milk to a little baby human being. We're not cows. It's devastating. My finally now my mother did that. My sister went vegan. My sister's daughter went vegan. Now she has three little kids that are vegan from birth, right? They never have had any meat or dairy products, and they're the strongest, healthiest, happiest kids or you can ever imagine seeing. They're much healthier than all of their classmates who are eating dairy products. So the thing to understand, like I myself, I have been very blessed since I went vegan 38 years ago, not to go to a doctor, right, in 38 years. And I think that natural ability to be healthy is a tremendous asset to our whole society. Society is best served by healthy people. Uh, but the pharmaceutical industry, the meat and dairy industry, they don't make profits if people are healthy and eating healthy plant-based foods. They make profits from people who are sick and who are eating horribly toxic animal-based foods. But that's not in our best interest. So the whole idea here is to educate each other, to to see that there's a reason why doctors and nurses are not taught anything about nutrition, or the little bit that they're taught tells them to just recommend dairy products and eggs and meat, and so that's how the industries make money. And so what we're talking about with this whole change of understanding is that there's an inner wisdom that we all have, that we're not able any longer to trust voices that are based on this old herding society paradigm of domination and exploitation of animals. When we eat their foods, we're bringing in foods that we're not designed for, and it just causes a lot more suffering for us. So I really appreciate that you were making that effort to help these mothers. And I would just like to encourage any mother who's listening to this to realize that we are not cows, we're not goats and sheep. There's no reason for us to be enslaving these poor animals and stealing their milk. How would we like it if a superior species looked at us as just a milk machine or just a piece of meat? We would hope that that so-called superior species would wake up and realize that we are individuals, that we have our yearnings, and we want to live our lives, and leave us alone. And it's the same thing with these animals. We are the ones who are the aggressors and the enslavers, and the stories that enable that aggression are lies. They're complete lies. They're fabrications. There are no studies, scientific studies, that are valid that teach us that it's of any benefit to eat animal-based foods. So we just need to question. This is the great calling of our time, I think, to question this narrative in 10,000 ways, any way we can possibly do it, with our friends and family and neighbors and colleagues, to do our own research and find out what the truth actually is about this.
I do have one question. What is your response to someone that says, well, I have backyard chickens, so it's okay if I eat their eggs, right?
We have to remember that this is what the same thing that people said about having slaves, black people owning them as slaves. It's okay, right? I'm not hurting them. I mean, I'm feeding them. They have a good life. No, you made them your property. That's already violence. These animals have lived for millions of years in the jungles of Southeast Asia, where they deserve to live. As soon as we take them, we tear them violently out of that habitat, and we bring them here, wherever that is, North America. Now they're living in my backyard. Now I have hens. I have no male. I don't want any roosters. I just want a bunch of females. So there's a tremendous suffering in that. They're not allowed to create their own communities the way they naturally would. They don't have their habitat that they naturally would have. I've stolen their sovereignty. The only food they get is what I give them. They can't leave my area because they're my slaves. I own where they are and what they do. And I steal their eggs, and I steal their lives, and I steal their purposes. And the males, where do I get them? I get them from a hatchery. What happens at a hatchery? All the males are ground up alive or suffocated at birth. They're shipped through the mail. So this is a system that's based on violence, giving us a product, an egg, which has no nutritional benefit. It's just a
Said at all that it's healthy. It's illegal.
right. It's illegal. It's illegal because there's no actual health benefit of an egg. There's the highest concentration of cholesterol that there is, and in an egg yolk. So here I am, 38 years, I haven't eaten an egg, and I'm so glad I haven't had one. That's the last thing I'd want to do is eat something. It's a vaginal secretion. I mean, what point is there to do so, to imprison females and steal these? And they're bred, chickens are like robins. They would give 3 or 4 eggs a year, right? I mean, they're bred to give 100 or 200 eggs a year. That's human violence. Why encourage that? There's no reason. It's a cultural brainwashing that we have to question. And the other thing I have to just say is that when we go to animal sanctuaries, a farmed animal sanctuary where there are some cows, maybe some chickens, maybe some pigs who have somehow escaped the massive gulag that we enforce these poor animals into, and they're being taken care of by caring human beings. The people that run these sanctuaries always say the same thing. They say that the most horrific abused animals that they find come from backyard operations. The commercial operations are terrible, but the abuse in backyard operations very often is even worse because people, either through neglect or through actual sadistic behavior, horribly abuse these animals. And we don't realize what's going on, but we can't think that it's good. Very often these animals really suffer terribly in backyard operations, and it's unnecessary.
I want to thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And thank you
Yeah.
for a wonderful book, which I hope everybody picks up and reads.
Thank you. Yeah, the World Peace Diet's been translated now into 16 languages, and we have about 4 more coming
Wow.
soon, Portuguese and a few more. But yeah, it's really an honor to be able to be part of this podcast and to share these ideas. And I want to thank everyone who's listening also. Thank you.
Thank you, Will.